The Galactic Council of Superior Species, or as I like to call it, the universe's most pretentious social club, had very specific opinions about humans. Too soft, too short-lived, too emotional, too everything that wasn't convenient for the bigger players in our cosmic neighborhood. Oh, forgive my manners. I'm Vex Talon, senior cultural attaché to the Terran Embassy, which is a fancy way of saying I'm the poor soul tasked with explaining why humans do, well, anything they do. My species, the Arikara, resemble what humans might call humanoid mantises, though I prefer elegantly articulated arthropods with superior sensory capabilities. Thank you very much. Let me tell you about Amara Kotri. Not because I want to trust me. Recounting this tale will probably get my mandibles clipped by the council, but because someone needs to set the record straight before the official historians turn this into another propaganda piece about knowing your place in the galaxy. I first met Amara 3 solar cycles ago at the diplomatic reception on Centauri Prime. While the various ambassadors were busy pretending to like each other's ceremonial cuisine, she stood alone by the viewport, staring out at the 3 moons. She didn't look particularly impressive standard human height, athletic build, dark hair pulled back in what I later learned was called a practical ponytail. But something about her posture screamed, I don't belong here, and I don't care who knows it. Magnificent view, isn't it? I said, sidling up next to her. Almost makes you forget about the petty politics happening behind us. She turned, those strange human eyes brown with golden flecks scanning me from antenna to tarsi. Almost, she replied, but then someone inevitably brings up politics again. Her mouth curved upward slightly, which I recognized as the human expression of mild amusement. Vex Talon, I said, extending my primary manipulator, cultural attack. Amara Kotri, she replied, taking my appendage without hesitation. Most humans flinch at touch contact with my species. She didn't. Engineering specialist, Earth Coalition. Engineering? Not diplomacy? You seem out of place. That's because I am. My supervisor broke both legs rock climbing on Mars. I was the only one with sufficient clearance to attend instead. I clicked my mandibles in surprise. So you are what? A substitute diplomat? I'm a woman who builds things that work, she said, sipping from her glass of blue Centaurian wine. Diplomacy rarely falls into that category. I liked her immediately. What I didn't know then was that this random human would eventually cause the biggest political crisis in the Galactic Council's 3,000-year history. And I certainly didn't know I'd help her do it. 3 months later, the Krell expansion crisis began. The Krell imagine if someone crossbred a rhinoceros with a scorpion and gave it advanced technology, and a bad attitude had decided that the resource-rich Orion arm wasn't big enough for both them and the humans. Their dominator, Graxthar, delivered an ultimatum to the Galactic Council: either remove human colonies from 7 border systems or face consequences. The council chamber erupted into the usual chaos. The Belshiri delegates floated anxiously in their containment bubbles, translucent skin flashing warning patterns. The Zothans growled deep in their throat pouches. The Quantum Collective's representative kept phasing in and out of reality, which they always did when agitated. High Counselor Psor of the Draconians raised his scaled hands for silence. As the most ancient species present, with lifespans measuring thousands of years, the Draconians always chaired these sessions. Their philosophy was simple. Those who live longest should make decisions for everyone else. Because obviously watching the universe for a few millennia makes you smarter, not just older and more set in your prejudices. The Council recognizes Ambassador Jovac of Earth, Sor rumbled. The human ambassador stood, his ceremonial robes looking about 2 sizes too large for his frame. Poor Jovac always tried so hard to appear imposing among the larger species. It rarely worked. High Counselor, esteemed delegates, Jovac began. Earth firmly rejects this ultimatum. These 7 systems were legally colonized under Council Charter Section 14 with proper registration, and legal technicalities matter little to the Krell Empire, interrupted Ambassador Graxthar, his armored exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber lights. "We require these systems for our population expansion. Humans have many colonies. They can relocate." I watched from my observation platform as Jovak attempted to argue. The human ambassador wasn't bad at his job, but he lacked something. Presence, perhaps. The gravitas needed when facing down an 8-foot-tall armored alien threatening to displace millions of human colonists. "The expense and logistics of relocating 7 fully established colonies is prohibitive," Jovak continued. "We propose instead a resource-sharing agreement that would." "Unacceptable," Graxthar clicked. "Krell do not share. We will allow 3 lunar cycles for evacuation, after which any remaining humans will be processed with the other resources." That's when I noticed Amara Khatri had entered the chamber. She wasn't supposed to be there. This session was limited to senior diplomatic personnel, but she stood at the back wall, watching intently. Something in her expression made my antennae twitch. High Counselor Bzor spoke again. "The Council will deliberate on this matter and reconvene in 2 days. Until then, all parties will maintain current positions without escalation." As the session adjourned, I made my way to Amara. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly. "And yet here I am," she replied, watching Graxthar and his delegation exit. "Interesting strategy from the Krell, don't you think?" I tilted my head. "Strategy? They are making demands backed by military threat. That's less strategy and more simple intimidation." "No," she said, eyes narrowing. "They are asking for 7 specific systems when they could have demanded just 1 or 2 and had a better chance of getting them. They know the Council won't force us to abandon all 7. So they don't actually want the systems. They want something else." I clicked my mandibles skeptically. "Such as?" "I'm not sure yet," she admitted, "but I intend to find out." "Fancy a drink, Vex Talon? I hear the Diplomatic Lounge has imported actual Earth whiskey." The Diplomatic Lounge on Centauri Prime was designed to accommodate 37 different species requirements for relaxation. For the methane breathers, there were special enclosures. For the aquatics, bubbling tanks. For the more conventional oxygen-dependent bipeds like humans and my kind, there were seats of various shapes and sizes. Amara chose a quiet corner booth. The server droid brought her whiskey and me a container of fermented plant nectar, my species' equivalent of alcohol. "You know what puzzles me about your species?" I said, watching her sip the amber liquid. "I'm sure the list is lengthy," she replied dryly. "Your fragility," I continued. "Humans are so breakable. No natural armor, no enhanced strength, mediocre sensory capabilities, and lifespans barely reaching a century. Yet you have expanded faster than almost any species since joining the galactic community. Perhaps we are motivated by our short lifespans," she suggested. "When you only get 80 years or so, you tend to hurry." Perhaps, I agreed, but it makes many council species nervous. They think in terms of centuries and millennia. Humans make decisions so quickly, take risks so readily. Amara leaned forward. "The Krell crisis isn't about border systems, Vex. It's about testing how the Council responds to human problems." I absorbed this. "You think the Krell are probing for weakness in the Alliance?" "I think the Krell are working with someone else," she said. "Someone who wants to know if humans can be sacrificed without consequences." My antennae stiffened in alarm. "That's a serious accusation." "Do you have evidence?" "Not yet," she admitted. "Just a feeling. And some interesting data on ships moving through the neutral zone near Draconian space." I nearly spilled my drink. "The Draconians? You think they are collaborating with the Krell?" "I didn't say that," she said carefully. "But consider this. Who benefits most if humans are forced to abandon resource-rich systems? Who sits at the head of the Council and makes the final decisions? Who has been quietly opposing every human petition for increased representation for the last 50 years? The implications were disturbing. The Draconians were founding members of the Galactic Council, respected for their wisdom and ancient civilization. if they were manipulating interspecies conflicts for their own benefit. Even if you are right, I said, what can you do? You are not even an official diplomat. Amara's expression changed then. Her lips curved into what humans call a smile, but there was nothing friendly about it. It reminded me of Arikaran predators just before they strike. That's actually an advantage, she said. No one's watching me. The next day, I received a secure communication from Amara requesting to meet at the Centauri Prime Central Archives, not exactly a typical tourist destination. The archives housed millennia of Galactic Council records, most of them mundane administrative data that would bore even the most dedicated historian. I found her at a private research terminal, surrounded by holographic displays showing star charts and trade route data. Should I ask how you got access to restricted council records? I inquired, settling beside her. Probably not, she replied without looking up. But if anyone asks, I'm conducting research for Ambassador Jovac. And are you? In a manner of speaking. I examined the displays. They showed shipping manifests, resource surveys, and military deployment records for the 7 disputed systems and, interestingly, several draconian border sectors. Look at this, Amara said, highlighting a section. Resource surveys from 50 years ago compared to current scans. I studied the data. The composition has changed. These systems used to be primarily valuable for rare minerals, but now they show high concentrations of chromium ore, she finished, the essential component in temporal stabilizers. This was significant. Temporal technology was strictly regulated by the Council, with good reason. The ability to manipulate time, even in small, controlled ways, had profound implications for interstellar travel, communications, and potentially warfare. The Krell don't use temporal technology, I noted. Their physiology can't tolerate the quantum fluctuations. Exactly, Amara said. But guess who pioneered temporal stabilization research? The Draconians, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place. And with their extended lifespans, they would have the patience to wait decades for resources to become valuable. Now you are getting it? She said, eyes bright with the thrill of discovery. But here's where it gets really interesting. She pulled up another display showing council voting records. 327 years ago, the Draconians proposed a measure to claim exclusive mining rights to systems with significant chromium deposits, citing safety concerns about less advanced species accessing temporal materials. I assume it failed? It passed, she corrected me. But 50 years later, when humans joined the council, we challenged it as monopolistic and got the measure overturned. The Draconians have never forgiven us for that. I processed this information. So you believe the Draconians are using the Krell as proxies to reclaim chromium-rich systems without appearing directly involved? It's more than that, Amara said. These systems form a strategic corridor. Whoever controls them could potentially establish a chain of temporal communication relays that would give them a massive advantage in information flow. They could essentially know about events before they happen. The implications were staggering. That would upset the entire balance of power in the quadrant. In the galaxy, she corrected. And humans are the only ones standing in their way. What do you intend to do with this information? I asked. Take it to the council, obviously. I clicked my mandibles in distress. They won't believe you. Not without irrefutable proof of collusion. The Draconians have been respected members of galactic society for millennia. You are a single human engineer with circumstantial evidence. Then I will get better evidence, she said simply. How? Her smile returned, that predatory expression that made my exoskeleton tingle with unease. That's where you come in, Vex. How would you like to help me break into the Draconian embassy? I should have said no. Any rational being would have. Breaking into a sovereign embassy was not just illegal, it was the kind of offense that could get both our species sanctioned by the Council. But something about Amara Kotri made rational thought difficult. Perhaps it was her confidence, so at odds with her species' physical limitations. Perhaps it was the audacity of her plan. or perhaps it was simply that I'd grown bored with centuries of diplomatic platitudes and wanted to see what would happen if someone finally disrupted the carefully maintained facade of interspecies cooperation. Whatever the reason, I found myself that night lurking in the maintenance tunnels beneath the Draconian embassy, dressed in a service uniform and questioning my life choices. "This is insane," I whispered as Amara consulted a small holo map of the embassy infrastructure. "If we are caught, best-case scenario is permanent exile from council space." "What's the worst case?" she asked, seemingly unconcerned. "Execution for espionage?" "Then let's not get caught," she replied, as if it were that simple. "According to these schematics, the ambassador's private server room should be accessible through the environmental control junction ahead." "And how exactly did you obtain classified embassy schematics?" "I built half the environmental systems in this diplomatic sector. The Draconians insisted on having a separate grid from the rest of the embassies, claimed their superior physiology required specific atmospheric conditions." "It does," I pointed out. "Their homeworld has higher oxygen content and they are arrogant lizards who think they are better than everyone else," she finished. "Their special requirements could have been accommodated on the main system. They chose separation because it gave them more control and privacy." We reached the junction, a cramped chamber filled with humming equipment. Amara quickly identified an access panel and began bypassing its security. "You know," I said, keeping watch, "for someone who claims to be just an engineer, you seem remarkably skilled at covert operations." "Earth Coalition Special Engineering Corps," she said, not looking up from her work. "We don't just build things. Sometimes we need to figure out how other people's things work." "You are a spy," I realized. "I'm an engineer with additional training," she corrected. "There? Got it." The panel slid open, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft. "That looks barely wide enough for a human," I noted, eyeing my considerably larger frame. "You are keeping watch," she said, pulling out a small device. "This data extractor will copy any files related to Krell communications or chromium mining. Should only take about 10 minutes. And if you are discovered? Then I will probably need a really good cultural attach to explain why my actions don't reflect official Earth policy," she said with a wink. Before I could protest, she had slipped into the shaft and disappeared. The next 10 minutes were among the longest of my life. Every distant sound had me imagining security forces descending upon us. My antennae twitched constantly, scanning for changes in air currents that might indicate approaching Draconians. Finally, Amara emerged, looking triumphant and slightly dusty. "Got it," she whispered. "And something else. A direct communication log between High Counselor Psor and Graxthar of the Krell, dated 3 months before the Krell made their territorial demands." "That's still not definitive proof," I cautioned. "The High Counselor communicates with many species." "True. But most communications don't include detailed maps of human colony defenses and instructions on which systems to target for maximum political impact." My mandibles fell open in shock. "They actually recorded such conversations?" "Arrogance," Amara said, tucking the data device away. "The Draconians have been manipulating galactic politics for so long they have become careless. They never expected anyone would dare infiltrate their embassy." We made our way back through the maintenance tunnels without incident, emerging into a quiet service alley several blocks from the diplomatic quarter. The triple moons of Centauri Prime cast everything in ghostly blue light. "What now?" I asked. "Even with this evidence, the Council may not act. The Draconians control too many votes." Amara's expression was resolute. "We don't need the full Council. Just enough key members to form a coalition. The Belshiri have always been wary of Draconian influence. The quantum collective values data integrity above all else. They will be outraged by this manipulation. And the Zothans have been looking for an excuse to challenge Draconian authority for centuries. That's still not enough votes to censure a founding member." "We don't need to censure them," she said. "We just expose them publicly and force a new vote on the Krell Crisis, one where the Draconians must recuse themselves due to conflict of interest." I had to admire her strategic thinking. And you believe Ambassador Jovac can orchestrate this political maneuver? For the first time, Amara looked uncertain. Jovac is cautious. He may not see this as I do. Then who will present this evidence? Her eyes met mine, steady and determined. I will. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began exactly as one would expect, with procedural objections. This session was called without proper notification periods, protested the draconian sub-councillor Rezkater. High Councillor Bzor had conspicuously chosen not to attend, sending his subordinate instead. And the proposed speaker is not an accredited diplomat. The chamber buzzed with the various sounds of 24 species expressing irritation. Amara stood at the center of the chamber, calm amidst the chaos, wearing a simple Earth Coalition uniform rather than diplomatic robes. Ambassador Jovac looked deeply uncomfortable. When Amara had approached him with the evidence, he had reluctantly agreed to sponsor her testimony but clearly regretted it now. Humans had a saying about career suicide that seemed applicable to his current expression. The Belshiri representative's bubble bobbed forward. The council recognizes that proper procedures exist for a reason, came the melodious translated voice. However, when those procedures are used to suppress information vital to council security, exceptions must be made. We vote to hear this human. Seconded, rasped the Zothan delegate, throat sac pulsing. Very well, Rezkater conceded with obvious reluctance. The human may speak. Briefly, Amara activated the central projection system, and suddenly the chamber was filled with holographic evidence, communication logs, resource surveys, military assessments, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation between Bzor and the Krell Dominator discussing the human problem, and how removing their colonies would return proper balance to the Council. As you can see, Amara said into the stunned silence, the current Krell crisis is not a territorial dispute but a manufactured conflict designed to weaken human influence and allow the Draconians to regain control of chromium resources they lost legal rights to decades ago. Rezkater's scales flushed a deep crimson. These materials are obviously falsified. The High Councillor would never engage in such undignified manipulations. The data carries quantum verification markers, chimed in the quantum collective representative, their form shifting between states of matter. We detect no falsification. Even if these communications are genuine, Rezkater countered, they represent legitimate diplomatic discussions about regional security. Amara's voice remained steady. Planning the forced displacement of millions of colonists is not diplomacy. It's conspiracy. And using the Krell as proxies to avoid direct responsibility is cowardice. That word cowardice sent a ripple through the chamber. In galactic politics, questioning another species' courage was tantamount to the gravest insult. Rezkater's clawed hand slammed down on his podium. You dare? A human, the most fragile, short-lived species ever admitted to the Council, accuses the Draconian Imperium of cowardice? We who navigated the stars when your ancestors were still discovering fire? Age doesn't confer wisdom, Amara responded evenly. Sometimes it just gives you more time to perfect your prejudices. The chamber erupted. Some species whistled in shock, others rumbled with approval. The Zothans were practically vibrating with barely contained delight at the draconian discomfort. Ambassador Jovac looked like he might faint. I watched from my observation platform, mandibles clicking nervously. This was not proceeding as a normal diplomatic exchange. Amara was not playing by the established rules of council discourse, where direct confrontation was avoided and everything was couched in layers of politeness and protocol. She was being human, direct, emotional, provocative. And it was working. The Earth Coalition moves for an immediate vote to reject the Krell ultimatum and investigate the Draconian High Council for ethics violations, Amara declared. You have no standing to propose council motions, Rezkater sputtered. I second the motion, called the Zothan representative immediately, as do the Belshiri, added their delegate. One by one, species that had long chafed under draconian dominance voiced their support. Even those traditionally aligned with the draconians seemed swayed by the evidence, or perhaps simply unwilling to publicly side with exposed conspirators. Res Cater's scales now pulsed between crimson and pale yellow rage and fear. This is unprecedented. A non-diplomat has no authority to. Actually, interrupted Amara, as of this morning I do have the authority. She activated her communicator, displaying an official appointment. By emergency provision of Earth Coalition Statute 15B, I have been named Acting Special Envoy with full diplomatic powers. I nearly fell from my observation perch. When had this happened? How had she convinced Earth authorities to grant her such status? The answer came moments later when Earth Prime Minister de la Cruz appeared via holographic projection. Esteemed council members. The Prime Minister began in light of the extraordinary circumstances and evidence presented by Special Envoy Khatri. Earth formally requests an emergency vote as proposed. Furthermore, we demand the immediate recusal of all draconian representatives from this matter due to clear conflict of interest. The chamber fell silent. Even Res Cater seemed momentarily speechless. Then, from the main entrance, a thunderous voice echoed, "There will be no vote." High Counselor Bzor had arrived, his massive scaled form radiating ancient power and barely contained fury. The chamber's atmosphere instantly changed, many delegates shrinking back from his presence. "This session is suspended," he declared. "These accusations require proper investigation through established channels, not hasty judgments based on materials of questionable provenance." It was a masterful recovery attempt. By invoking procedural necessity, he sought to delay any action until the immediate outrage subsided. In a week, in a month, the evidence might be questioned, witnesses pressured, memories altered. The Draconians had played the long game for millennia. But Amara wasn't finished. "I expected this response," she said, activating another communication channel, "which is why I took the liberty of sharing all evidence with every member world's independent media simultaneously. The transmission completed 30 seconds ago." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Public exposure was the one thing the council feared above all. Their carefully maintained image of unity and wisdom now shattered across 1,000 worlds. Bzor's eyes narrowed to slits. "You have overstepped, human. This action will have consequences." "It already has," Amara replied, gesturing to the voting display where council members were rapidly recording their positions despite Bzor's attempted suspension. The numbers clearly showed a majority rejecting the Krell ultimatum and supporting an investigation into draconian conduct. "This vote has no legitimacy," Bzor declared. "I am High Counselor and—" "Not anymore," interrupted the Quantum Collective representative. "The vote also shows sufficient support for your temporary removal pending investigation." For a moment, just a moment, Bzor's composure cracked. In his ancient eyes, I saw something I never expected: fear, not of the vote or the investigation, but of this small human female who had accomplished in days what other species had failed to do for centuries. She had challenged the established order and won. "This isn't over," Bzor said quietly, his voice carrying despite its lowered volume. "No," agreed Amara, "it's just beginning." The aftermath was immediate and chaotic. The Krell, upon learning their draconian allies had been exposed, quickly withdrew their ultimatum and denied any collusion. The 7 disputed systems remained under human control. High Counselor Bzor and several senior draconian officials were placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and Amara Khatri became, overnight, the most famous or infamous human in council space. I found her in the diplomatic lounge the evening after the emergency session, sitting alone at the same corner table. She looked simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. "You have caused quite the galactic incident," I said, settling across from her with my nectar flask. "Someone had to," she replied. "The system was broken." "And now? What happens when the initial shock fades and the Draconians begin calling in favors from their many allies?" Her expression turned serious. That's why this can't stop with just exposing one conspiracy. The entire council needs restructuring. No more automatic leadership positions based on species age. No more weighted voting that favors the ancient civilizations. Equal representation regardless of how long your people have been. Traveling the stars. I clicked my mandibles skeptically. You are talking about dismantling a system that has maintained interstellar peace for 3,000 years. Has it? She challenged. Or has it just maintained a comfortable status quo for the species at the top while newcomers struggle for basic recognition? How many conflicts have been allowed to simmer on the edges of council space because they didn't affect the core worlds? She had a point. The council's peace had always been selective, prioritizing stability among major powers while often ignoring injustices that didn't threaten that stability. What's your next move? I asked. Tomorrow, Earth will formally propose a council reform initiative. We are already building a coalition with the Belshiri, Zothans, Quantum Collective, and several mid-tier species. We need a 2/3 majority to pass fundamental reforms. The Draconians and their closest allies control nearly 40% of votes. You will never get 2/3. She smiled that predatory smile again. Watch me. Why are you telling me all this? I asked suddenly. I represent a species traditionally aligned with the Draconians. By your own logic, I should be your opponent. Amara studied me for a long moment. Because you helped me when you didn't have to. Because you saw the same problems I did. And because I think the Arikara deserve better than being the Draconians' junior partners for the next millennium. She leaned forward. Your people value knowledge and cultural exchange. Imagine what you could accomplish if your status wasn't determined by how long you have been spacefaring, but by what you contribute to galactic society now. It was an appealing vision. The Arikara had always chafed somewhat under Draconian patronage, though we rarely admitted it publicly. They will come after you personally, I warned. The Draconians don't forget, and they don't forgive. They play the longest of long games. Let them try, she said, and I was struck again by the sheer audacity of humans. Here was a member of a physically unimposing species with a lifespan barely reaching a century. Yet she spoke of outmaneuvering beings who had been navigating galactic politics since before her ancestors had written language. You know what the Draconians call humans behind closed doors? I asked. The mayflies. Beautiful, briefly captivating and gone in an instant. Amara's expression hardened. Then they have fundamentally misunderstood their opponent. Our brief lives don't make us weaker, they make us more determined. We don't have millennia to wait for gradual change. We need to make our mark now. She stood, preparing to leave. The emergency session reconvenes tomorrow to select an interim High Counselor. For the first time in Council history, it might not be a Draconian. I could use an ally from an unexpected quarter. Are you asking me to betray my species' traditional alliances? I'm asking you to help shape a galaxy where traditional alliances don't determine a species' future, she countered, where merit matters more than age. After she left, I remained, contemplating my nectar and the crossroads before me. The safe path was clear: maintain Arikaran alignment with the Draconians, distance myself from this human revolutionary, and wait for the inevitable counterstroke that would restore the ancient order. The other path, Amara's path, promised change, opportunity, and considerable danger. In all my years as cultural attack, I had observed humans from a professional distance, cataloging their peculiarities and trying to explain their seemingly contradictory behaviors to my superiors. They were emotional yet logical, aggressive yet compassionate, fragile yet resilient. And now one of them had just upended 3,000 years of galactic politics because she thought it was unfair. The most baffling part? I was seriously considering helping her do more. As the 3 moons of Centauri Prime cast their blue light through the viewport, I made my decision. The galaxy was changing, whether the ancient powers approved or not. Perhaps it was time for the Arikara to change with it. The next morning, the Centauri Prime sunrise painted the diplomatic quarter in shades of amber and gold. I arrived early at the council chamber, my decision made but my nerves still buzzing like overloaded circuitry. Today would either mark the beginning of a new galactic order or the spectacular failure of human audacity. The chamber filled quickly. Everyone wanted a front-row seat to the political theater about to unfold. Species that normally sent junior representatives had dispatched their highest officials. Even the notoriously reclusive Mycosonians had emerged from their fungal habitats to witness the proceedings. Amara entered without fanfare, now dressed in formal Earth Coalition diplomatic attire. The simple blue uniform with silver trim looked almost severe compared to the elaborate costumes worn by most delegates, but somehow that austerity only heightened her presence. Ambassador Jovac trailed behind her, looking simultaneously proud and terrified, like a parent watching their offspring attempt a dangerous stunt. "Quite the audience today," I said, approaching them. "Half the galaxy seems eager to watch the continuation of yesterday's drama." "Drama implies fiction," Amara replied. "This is history." Jovac cleared his throat nervously. "Cultural attaché Vex Talon, good to see you. I trust the Arakaran delegation will maintain its traditional voting patterns today?" Before I could respond, the chamber lights dimmed, signaling the session's commencement. Acting Chair Nilith of the Belshiri floated to the central platform, her containment bubble glowing softly. "This emergency session will address 2 items," her melodious translated voice announced. "First, the appointment of an interim High Counselor following pause recusal. Second, the Earth Coalition's proposal for Council structural reforms." From the Draconian section, Sub-Counselor Rezcator rose. Without Psar's imposing presence, he seemed diminished, but his voice still carried the weight of millennia of authority. "The Draconian Imperium nominates Councillor Thravnar of the suzerainty of Nyx for interim High Counselor," he announced. A strategic choice. The Nyxtarians were longtime Draconian allies but technically a separate species, allowing the Draconians to maintain control while appearing to relinquish it. Clever. Next, the Zothan representative's throat sac pulsed as he spoke. "The free worlds of Zotha nominate Special Envoy Amara Khatri of Earth." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Nominating a human, and such a junior one at that, was unprecedented, bordering on outrageous. Amara's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight widening of her eyes. This nomination had not been part of her plan. Rezcator was less restrained. "Absurd. The nominee has barely existed for 3 decades. She lacks the wisdom, experience, and temperament for such responsibility." "Perhaps," countered the Zothan, "what the Council needs is precisely someone who hasn't spent centuries reinforcing old prejudices." The chamber erupted into a cacophony of arguments. Some delegates supported the human nomination simply to spite the Draconians. Others were genuinely intrigued by the possibility of radical change. Many were horrified at the mere suggestion of a human in such a powerful position. As acting chair, Nilith called for order. "Additional nominations?" The Quantum Collective's representative phased partially through their podium, their species equivalent of raising a hand. "We nominate cultural attaché Vex Talon of the Arakaran Consortium." Now it was my turn for shocked mandible clicking. Me? A mid-level diplomat suddenly thrust into a galactic leadership contest? I caught Amara's gaze across the chamber. She looked as surprised as I felt, but there was something else in her expression: calculation. Before I could process this development, a 4th nomination emerged from the Mycosonians, putting forward a candidate from the Tellurian Alliance. The nominations closed, and the chamber prepared for arguments from supporters of each candidate. Rezcator spoke at length about Thravnar's centuries of wisdom, careful diplomatic experience, and deep understanding of Council traditions, all thinly veiled code for will maintain the status quo. The Zothan representative made an impassioned case for Amara, emphasizing her courage in exposing corruption and her fresh perspective. "For too long we have equated age with wisdom. Perhaps it is time to value action over inertia, courage over caution." When the Quantum Collective spoke for my nomination, their argument was pragmatic. The Arakarans have traditionally aligned with the ancient powers while maintaining positive relations with newer council members. Vex Talon has demonstrated both respect for tradition and openness to necessary change, a bridge candidate for transitional times. I barely heard the Mycosonian's speech supporting the Tellurian candidate, too busy wondering how I had suddenly become a galactic political contender. As the arguments concluded, Acting Chair Nihilith announced, "We will now proceed to the vote." The voting in council proceedings was public and sequential, with each species vote displayed on the central holographic projection. As the votes began registering, clear patterns emerged. The Draconian bloc supported Thavnar, as expected. Most of the newer species divided their support between Amara and the Tellurian candidate. What shocked observers was the split in traditionally conservative voting blocs. Several species that had aligned with the Draconians for centuries were casting votes for me. When the Arakaran ambassador's turn came, he paused, clearly conflicted. By tradition, he should support the Draconian candidate. But the momentum in the room was palpable. The Arakaran Consortium, he finally declared, votes for cultural attach Vex Talon. The final tally appeared. Thavnar, 32% Amarakatri, 28% Vex Talon, 25% Tellurian candidate, 15%. No candidate had achieved a majority. Under council rules, the lowest scoring candidate would be eliminated and a new vote taken. The Tellurian was removed from contention, and a second vote commenced. The tension in the chamber grew palpable as the results appeared. Thavnar, 35% Amarakatri, 33% Vex Talon, 32%. Still no majority. I would be eliminated next, my brief moment as a galactic contender over. But before the third vote could begin, Amara stepped forward. Point of procedure. Acting Chair. I wish to withdraw my candidacy and endorse cultural attach of Vex Talon. Another shock waved through the assembly. Res Cater's scales flushed crimson. This is manipulation. The human plans to control a proxy candidate. Amara's voice remained calm. I recognize that many council members, while ready for change, are not prepared for a human interim high counselor. I respect that caution. Vex Talon represents a middle path experienced in council ways but open to necessary reforms. The Zothan delegate immediately supported her motion. We transfer our votes to the Arakaran candidate. Acting Chair Nihilith announced, the final vote will be between Sub-Councillor Thavnar and cultural attach Vex Talon. As the votes were tallied again, I stood frozen in disbelief. How had I, a relatively minor diplomatic official, become the focal point of this galactic power struggle? More importantly, why had Amara ceded her position? She hadn't struck me as someone who relinquished power easily. The final tally appeared. Thavnar, 42%, Vex Talon, 58%. The Council confirms cultural attach Vex Talon as interim High Counselor, Nihilith announced. The position will be held until investigations conclude and permanent leadership elections can be arranged. The chamber erupted in a mixture of approving and disapproving sounds from dozens of species. I felt simultaneously elated and terrified. As I moved toward the High Counselor's platform, I passed Amara. "Congratulations, High Counselor," she murmured. Now the real work begins. Hours later, after a dizzying series of ceremonial acknowledgments and procedural briefings, I finally had a moment alone with Amara in what was now my private council chamber, a room I had never expected to enter except as a minor functionary. "You planned this," I accused, my antennae twitching with the stress of the day. "But you never intended to become High Counselor yourself." She leaned against the ancient stone desk that had supported Draconian leaders for millennia. "But not exactly. I expected to be nominated, yes, but I thought the conservative bloc would unify behind a single candidate. Your nomination was a surprise. Then why withdraw? You had nearly as many votes as Thavnar." "Because I could never win a final vote," she said practically. "Too many species simply will not accept a human in that chair yet." "But you are perfect, respected by traditionalists, but you have shown willingness to challenge the status quo." And most importantly, you understand what's at stake. I sank into the oversized chair designed for draconian physiology. And what exactly is that? The future of the Council. The balanced representation of all species, regardless of age or physical characteristics. She pushed away from the desk, pacing the chamber. For too long, the so-called ancient species have used their longer lifespans to justify dominance. They call us mayflies, treat us as children playing at politics while they make the real decisions. You realize, I said carefully, that by making me High Counselor you have simply replaced one non-human with another. How does that advance human standing? Her smile was sharp. Because you are not draconian. You don't share their prejudices about humans or their 1,000-year grudges. And because you are going to help me pass the reform initiative. Ah, there it was. The real purpose behind her elaborate political maneuver. The initiative goes before the Council tomorrow, I noted. As interim High Counselor, I'm expected to maintain neutrality on major policy votes. Neutrality doesn't mean inaction, she countered, just fair process. And speaking of fair process, we need to talk about what happens when the Draconians make their countermove. You think they will attempt to reverse yesterday's vote? I think they have been playing politics since your ancestors were sorting out how many arms to have, she said dryly. They won't accept this setback quietly. As if summoned by her words, my new council communicator chimed. High Counselor, there's been an incident at the Earth Embassy. Ambassador Jovac requests your immediate presence. Mara and I exchanged glances. It begins, she said quietly. The Earth Embassy was in chaos. Security personnel rushed about, diplomats huddled in concerned groups, and at the center of it all stood Ambassador Jovac, his face ashen. What's happened? I asked, my position as interim High Counselor parting the crowd before us. An attack, Jovac said, his voice shaking. Someone breached our secure communications center. 2 staff members injured. The Reform Initiative files? Amara asked immediately. Accessed and corrupted, Jovac confirmed. Our backup systems were simultaneously hit with a targeted virus. Very sophisticated. I clicked my mandibles in concern. Forensic evidence? None, Jovac said. Whoever did this knew our systems intimately. The Draconians, Amara said flatly. Jovac looked uncomfortable. We have no proof. We don't need proof to know, she interrupted. They are trying to delay tomorrow's vote by destroying our proposal documentation. Without the proper filing, Council rules require a 60-day postponement. I considered this. As interim High Counselor, I could grant an emergency exception to the filing requirements. And give the Draconians cause to challenge your neutrality on your first day? Jovac objected. They'd call for your immediate removal. Mara's eyes narrowed in thought. We don't need an exception. We need to resubmit the complete proposal before the filing deadline at midnight. Impossible, Jovac said. The initiative is over 300 pages of legal, economic, and structural reforms. Even if we worked from memory. I can do it, Amara interrupted. I wrote most of it. Both Jovac and I stared at her. The entire reform initiative? By yourself? I asked incredulously. I had input from our legal team. But yes, I drafted the core document, she confirmed. I have an eidetic memory. If you get me access to a secure terminal, I can reconstruct it before the deadline. Jovac hesitated. Our systems are compromised. We can't guarantee security even on backup terminals. Then we don't use Earth systems, Amara said, turning to me. The High Counselor's private terminal can't be accessed by anyone without direct authorization, not even the Draconians. And as a non-human system, they won't have planned for it in their attack. I nodded slowly. It could work. But you'd have less than 6 hours to reconstruct hundreds of pages of complex policy documentation. That predatory smile appeared again. Watch me. Back in the High Counselor's chamber, I secured the room and activated the ancient terminal system. Its interface was optimized for draconian use, But Amara adapted quickly, her fingers flying across the modified controls. "I will need to dictate certain sections," she said. "The terminal won't accept some of the human-specific notation." "I will assist," I offered, positioning myself at a secondary input station. What followed was one of the most extraordinary displays of human cognitive ability I had ever witnessed. Amara reconstructed complex legal frameworks from memory, dictating exact phrasings of crucial provisions while simultaneously typing other sections. She didn't refer to notes there were none to refer to. Every citation, every statistical reference, every carefully worded compromise came directly from her mind. Section 47.3, she recited, not pausing in her typing. Representational voting reform. Paragraph A. Council voting power shall be allocated based on a three-factor formula accounting for population size, number of settled systems, and contribution to shared security arrangements, with no single factor constituting more than 40% of total voting weight. Hour after hour, the document grew. 300 pages became 400 as Amara added new provisions addressing potential loopholes the original hadn't covered. "They did us a favor," she remarked during a brief hydration break. "The revised version is stronger than the original. I have addressed several weaknesses our legal team identified but couldn't fix before filing." "You are rather remarkable," I said, meaning it. Most beings couldn't remember what they had for breakfast, let alone reconstruct hundreds of pages of legal documentation. "Necessity," she replied simply. "When your species only gets a few decades, you learn to make them count." 5 hours in, we were interrupted by an urgent communication. Ambassador Jovac appeared on the holographic projector, looking frantic. "The Draconians know what you are doing," he warned. "They have filed a procedural objection claiming the High Counselor is providing improper assistance to Earth's initiative." "On what grounds?" I asked. "That you are violating neutrality by allowing your office resources to be used for partisan purposes." I considered this. The objection is valid under traditional interpretation. But nothing in the actual Council Charter prevents the High Counselor from providing administrative support to member species in emergency situations. "They have called for an immediate review by the Council Ethics Committee," Jovac continued. "If you continue, you risk removal." I looked at Amara, who had not stopped typing throughout this exchange. "How much more?" 90 minutes should do it," she replied without looking up. "But we will need someone to physically deliver the filing to the Council Registrar. The Draconians will be watching all digital submission channels." I made my decision. "Ambassador Jovac, please inform the Ethics Committee that I will present myself for review after the current emergency situation is resolved. In the meantime, I am exercising High Counselor Emergency Authority under Charter Section 12 to ensure fair process for all Council members." After disconnecting, I turned back to Amara. "That won't hold them for long." "It doesn't need to," she said, her focus unwavering. "Just long enough." As the deadline approached, Amara completed the final sections with minutes to spare. The reconstructed reform initiative now filled the terminal's display 443 pages of comprehensive galactic governance restructuring. "It's done," she said, finally leaning back from the terminal, exhaustion evident in her posture but triumph in her eyes. I transmitted the document to the secure physical media device, an ancient draconian crystal storage unit that couldn't be hacked remotely. "Now we just need to get this to the Council Registrar before midnight." "Which won't be easy," came a voice from the doorway. Rescator stood there, flanked by 2 draconian security officers. "What?" "The Ethics Committee has ordered an immediate cessation of your activities, High Counselor." I rose to my full height, mandibles extended in the Arakaran display of authority. "I am still High Counselor, Rescator. Your presence in this chamber without invitation violates protocol." "Protocol was violated when you allowed this human to use High Council resources for Earth's benefit," he retorted. "The crystal, if you please. The filing deadline has passed." I checked the chronometer. "The deadline is 11 minutes from now." "Nevertheless, the Ethics Committee has suspended all filings pending review of this irregularity." Amara stood slowly, her small human frame somehow commanding attention despite being dwarfed by the Draconians. That's convenient timing, sub-counselor. Almost as if the ethics committee was prepared with a ruling before any complaint was even filed. Res Cater's scales flushed. Your insinuations grow tiresome, human, almost as tiresome as your transparent attempts to block reforms that would diminish draconian control, she countered. First sabotaging our embassy systems, now this procedural manipulation. You have no evidence of draconian involvement in any embassy security incident, Res Cater said smoothly. Now, the crystal. I held the storage device, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. Centuries of Arikaran tradition urged deference to the Draconians. But something else, something newer, pushed against that instinct. The Council Charter, I said slowly, states that any procedural ruling by the Ethics Committee must be formally delivered to all affected parties before taking effect. Has such notice been delivered to me as High Counselor? Res Cater hesitated. The committee instructed me to inform you verbally, given the urgency. Then no official ruling has been properly delivered, I concluded. Until it is, I retain full authority as interim High Counselor, and I am officially extending the filing deadline by 1 hour under emergency authority provisions. You cannot. I just did, I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. Now, as you have correctly observed, I should not be directly involved in delivering this filing. Therefore, I am recusing myself from that process. I handed the crystal to Amara. Special Envoy Khatri will deliver this to the Registrar as Earth's representative, which is entirely appropriate. Res Cater's tail lashed in frustration. She will not leave this chamber with that crystal. Are you physically threatening an accredited diplomat, sub-counselor? I asked mildly. That would be an interesting addition to the Ethics Committee's review. The Draconian security officers shifted uncomfortably. While Res Cater might bend rules, outright intimidation of diplomats was a serious breach of council law. This isn't over, Res Cater hissed, stepping aside. The reforms will never pass, regardless of whether they are properly filed. As Amara moved toward the door, crystal in hand, she paused beside the Draconian. You know what your people never understood about humans, Res Cater? You think our fragility makes us weak. But when you have evolved on a death world where everything is trying to kill you, where your own biology gives you barely a century to make your mark, you develop a certain determination. She stepped closer, looking up at his towering frame. You call us mayflies? Fine. But remember, it's not the predators everyone remembers from Earth's history. It's the swarms. The next day, the council chamber was even more packed than before. News of the dramatic filing conflict had spread throughout diplomatic circles. The reform initiative would be formally presented, then scheduled for debate and voting over the following days. As interim High Counselor, I called the session to order, acutely aware of the Draconian delegation's cold glares. The Ethics Committee had delivered their formal rebuke of my actions but stopped short of removing me, likely realizing that such a move would only martyr me to the reform cause. The Council recognizes Special Envoy Amara Khatri of Earth, presenting the Galactic Council Reform Initiative, I announced. Amara took the central platform, looking remarkably composed despite having worked through the night. The holographic display activated, showing the initiative's key points. Esteemed delegates, she began. For 3,000 years, this council has maintained a version of peace and cooperation among spacefaring species. That is an achievement worthy of respect. It's a diplomatic opening, acknowledging tradition before challenging it. However, she continued, the galaxy of today is not the galaxy of 3 millennia ago. When the council formed, only 12 species had achieved faster than light travel. Today, 78 species gather in this chamber, yet the fundamental power structures remain virtually unchanged. She highlighted the initiative's core proposals, voting reform based on current contributions rather than historical precedent, with rotating leadership positions rather than permanent draconian chairmanship, stronger protections for emerging species, and most controversially, the establishment of a temporal technology regulatory commission with representatives from all member worlds. As expected, Rescator requested immediate speaking rights. This initiative would destroy the stable framework that has preserved interstellar peace for millennia, he declared. It replaces wisdom with popularity, tradition with trend. The younger species lack the perspective to understand why certain powers must remain with those who have guided galactic affairs since before their ancestors left their home planets. Several delegates vocally supported the draconian position. Others, more than I expected, spoke in favor of at least debating the reforms. The chamber divided roughly along age lines, older species resistant, younger ones supportive. Then a surprise, Ambassador Thrávnar of the Nixtarians, who had been the draconian candidate for High Counselor, requested recognition. The suzerainty of Nix has been allied with the draconian Imperium since before most species here achieved spaceflight. He began in the typical ponderous Nixtarian cadence. We have benefited from that alliance and the stability it provided. Rescator looked smugly satisfied until Thrávnar continued. However, stability is not an end unto itself. It is merely a condition that allows for progress. The ancient Nixtarians' compound eyes fixed on the draconian delegation. Recent events have demonstrated that our current system has calcified from stability into stagnation. When preservation of power becomes the primary goal, corruption inevitably follows. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The Nixtarians breaking ranks with the Draconians? Unprecedented. The suzerainty supports opening debate on these reforms, Thrávnar concluded. Not all proposals may prove wise, but all deserve fair consideration. Other traditionally conservative species followed the Nixtarian lead, declaring support for at least considering the reforms. The momentum was shifting. Rescator made a final desperate attempt. This initiative was illegitimately filed, using improperly accessed High Council resources. The Ethics Committee has already ruled. I interrupted, issuing a rebuke but confirming the filing's validity. Unless you wish to challenge the Ethics Committee's authority as well, Sub-Counselor. Trapped by his own procedural arguments, Rescator fell silent. I called the vote to open formal debate on the reform initiative. The result was not even close, 72% in favor. As the session adjourned, delegates crowded around Amara, some offering congratulations, others raising concerns about specific provisions. She engaged with each thoughtfully, already building the coalition she would need for the final vote. I approached her after the crowd thinned. Impressive performance. Just the beginning, she replied. The real fight starts in the debate sessions. You have already accomplished what no one thought possible, I noted. Breaking the draconian Nixtarian alliance alone is historic. She shook her head. That wasn't me. That was you. Your willingness to stand up to Rescator showed the other ancient species that change was possible without catastrophe. You are the bridge they needed, respecting tradition while embracing necessary evolution. I hadn't considered it that way. Perhaps we make an effective team. Perhaps we do, she agreed. A human and an Arakaran, rewriting galactic governance. Not exactly what either of our species expected. They called you too fragile to lead, I remarked. Yet here you are, reshaping institutions that have stood for millennia. Amara looked out at the now empty council chamber, her expression thoughtful. Humans have never let fragility stop us. We break easily, yes, our bodies fail, our lives are short. But we leave marks far deeper than our footprints. As we stood together in that ancient chamber, I understood something fundamental about humans that the Draconians had never grasped. Their physical vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was the source of their strength. It drove them to build, to connect, to change their surroundings instead of simply enduring them. They couldn't afford the luxury of waiting centuries for gradual progress, so they forced change through sheer determination. The reform initiative would face challenges in the coming weeks. The Draconians would rally opposition, exploit procedural loopholes, perhaps even attempt more direct sabotage. But watching Amara Khatri prepare for those battles, I wouldn't bet against the human. After all, they'd evolved on a planet that tried to kill them at every turn, yet they'd survived to reach the stars. They'd joined a council that dismissed them as temporary curiosities, yet they'd managed to shake its very foundations in less than a century. Perhaps the galaxy needed a bit of human fragility and the strength it created. 6 months later, as the Reform Initiative passed its final vote with a narrow but decisive majority, I watched from the High Counselor's platform as Amara received congratulations from delegates representing dozens of worlds. The Council was forever changed. Power had begun shifting from the ancient species to a more balanced representation. The Temporal Technology Commission was already establishing new protocols for responsible research. And as for me, my term as interim High Counselor would soon end. But I'd already been nominated for a permanent position on the newly established Governance Council, a rotating body that would replace the single High Counselor role. The Draconians had retreated to their core worlds, nursing their wounded pride but slowly accepting the new reality. Their influence remained significant, but no longer dominant. A more balanced galaxy was emerging. "Quite the victory," I said to Amara as the session concluded. "What will you do next? Return to engineering?" She laughed. "After reshaping galactic politics, I think I have developed a taste for diplomacy." "The galaxy may never be the same," I observed. "That was rather the point," she replied with that now familiar predatory smile. "Although I should warn you, humans tend to get bored easily. Once we solve one impossible problem, we start looking for the next." I clicked my mandibles in amusement. "He flies with ambition." "Exactly," she agreed. "Just imagine what we will do with our next 100 years." Looking at her, this small, fragile, determined being who had transformed institutions millennia older than her entire civilization, I could imagine it all too clearly. The galaxy had better prepare itself. The mayflies were just getting started.